Welcome, dreamers, to the realm where the past whispers not in words, but in rhythms, strange and haunting, echoing through cobbled streets, long silent. Tonight we wander into one of history's most surreal mysteries, a summer not marked by war or fire, but by dancing, relentless, unbidden. In the quiet town of Strasbourg in the year 1518, something stirred within the shadows of the human soul, and hundreds took to the streets in a trance-like state, dancing not for joy, but as if compelled by some ancient force. Their feet moved, but their eyes held sorrow. They danced until they could dance no more. Before we embark on this journey through time's mysteries, if these ancient whispers resonate with your soul, let your presence be known through a gentle light, and join our circle of dreamers by subscribing to continue these nightly journeys into history's hidden realms. Share with us, fellow dreamers, from which corner of the world you're joining tonight's contemplation. Let the global community of history's mysteries connect. It was July in Strasbourg, in the year of 1518. The sun rose early, and the air carried the scents of damp stone, baked bread, and the faint sweetness of river reeds swaying along the Ill River. The city, enclosed in the protective curves of medieval ramparts, stirred slowly under the weight of summer. Roof tiles shimmered in the morning heat, and the timbers of half-timber-built homes creaked softly, adjusting to the warmth. There was a hush that lived in Strasbourg's mornings, not silence, but a living quietude, punctuated by the distant clink of a smith's hammer, or the echo of hooves across the old stone bridge. In the shadow of the towering cathedral, life proceeded as it had for centuries. Bakers shaped dough with motions passed down from their fathers, nuns whispered psalms beneath arched ceilings, and merchants prepared their scales, eager for coin. Yet even in such normalcy, the world was never still. Beneath the surface of daily life, something ancient stirred, something unseen. A tension not spoken of aloud lingered in the corners of the city, a sense that the air, though warm and fragrant, carried more than just the breeze. That summer was hotter than most. The sun hung heavy, pressing down upon the city's slate rooftops. Crops wilted early in the fields, and the river ran slower, its clarity muddied by silt and heat. The townsfolk muttered that the heavens were displeased, that the sins of Europe were drawing divine scrutiny. It was an age where plagues had danced through villages before, and the memory of death never quite left the European heart. But this time, it was not a fever of the body that approached Strasbourg. It was something far stranger, something dreamlike, or nightmarish, depending on how one looked. Something that would leave no blood upon the ground but would stir the soul into unrest. The first step was gentle. She was called Frau Treffia, a woman of simple bearing, known by few and remembered by none before that moment. On the morning of July 14th, she stepped outside her modest home and began to move. The cathedral of Strasbourg La Notre Dame rose from the heart of the city like a mountain of stone dreams. Its spire touched the sky, piercing the blue with such grace that even the clouds seemed to slow their course, drifting gently around its crown as though in reverence. It was beneath this sacred silhouette that Strasbourg's life pulsed. The square below teemed with motion by day and hush by night, but in that summer of 1518 the square began to host a different rhythm, one not guided by priest or bell or wind, but by feet, unyielding, moving in strange procession. Frau Treffia came here often in those first days, not to pray, nor to light candles, nor to seek confession. She danced, her feet striking the flagstones beneath the cathedral's gaze, eyes blank, mouth silent, hair undone. Around her, townsfolk gathered in stunned silence, uncertain whether to call a priest or a physician. They watched as her body twisted through space with the grace of ritual, but none could name the rite. Some whispered that she was possessed, others said she was bewitched by the ghosts of the plague, which had claimed so many in decades past. A few, remembering ancient tales, wondered whether the spirit of Saint Vitus, the patron of dancers, had seized her heart and made of it a drum, but no answers came. The cathedral offered no relief. Its tall stained glass windows watched impassively, their saints and martyrs frozen in colored stillness, unable to reach through the centuries and offer comfort. The priests spoke of penance, of fasting, of sin, but their sermons dissolved in the summer air like mist over stone. And still she danced. By the third day, she was not alone. Others had joined her, drawn by something they could not name. One by one, they stepped into the square beneath the cathedral. Some came timidly. Others burst forth as if from a dream, their bodies already moving, possessed by an inner rhythm only they could feel. It was as if a hidden orchestra, playing just beyond the veil of waking reality, had found a new audience. Their movements were varied. Some spun, others trembled. A few fell into strange synchrony, their arms sweeping in mirrored arcs, and yet there was no coordination, no joy, no music to guide them. There is a music that lives beyond sound, a rhythm that courses not through the ears, but through the bones, through the breath, through the silence between thoughts. This was the music that held Strasbourg in its grip. No lute strings plucked, no flute sighed, no tambourines jingled in merriment. And yet, The dancers moved as if enveloped by invisible melodies. Their arms bent in graceful arcs or flailed wildly in torment. Feet pounded stone until shoes split and blood kissed the cobblestones. But, still, they danced. It was not a festival. There was no laughter, no garlands, no joyous song. This was a movement from the soul's unknown, depth like a shadow rising from the base of a well, reaching for light it cannot find. By the end of the first week, the number of dancers had grown. Dozens now filled the squares, the alleys, even the bridges that stretched over the river. People moved as if caught between waking and dream, their faces serene or stricken, bodies caught in a trance that would not let them go. The townspeople began to speak of it not as an ailment, but as a curse. Some swore they had seen strange lights flickering near the rooftops at night. Others claimed to hear a distant drum beat after midnight. Even animals grew restless. Dogs barked at empty corners. Horses refused to tread near the cathedral square. Birds, usually loud in the summer mornings, seemed to avoid the heart of the city, choosing instead the stillness of distant trees. And always the dancers moved, without pause, without sleep. Some collapsed from exhaustion only to rise again minutes later, as if drawn by some unseen hand that would not release its grip. Healers came and went. Holy men prayed. No one knew what to do. In the silence of the convent, the sisters lit candles and whispered rosaries in trembling voices. One nun wrote in her journal, "They dance as if death is singing in their ears, but no one else hears the melody." By now physicians had gathered from nearby towns, learnt men with scrolls, herbs, and logic. They debated whether the blood had turned hot or the bile had risen beyond reason. They wrapped feet in linen soaked in vinegar. They offered elixirs of lavender and fennel. They spoke of humors in the moon. But humors did not explain why the dancing spread, nor why certain houses seemed more susceptible, nor why it seemed to rise with the dusk like a tide in the soul. The river ill-winding like a silver thread through the fabric of Strasbourg had long carried the city's secrets. Its waters reflected the rose-colored stones of the buildings, the cathedral's spire, and the sky's moods. By day it murmured gently against its banks, brushing willow roots and moss-covered stones. By night it whispered, like a voice beneath the surface. As the dancing spread, the river watched. In the mornings, townsfolk would gather near the bridges, casting glances not just toward the dancers, but toward the river itself. Some believed the water had turned strange, its movements slower, its reflections deeper. Others claimed it carried faint music, as if ripples formed from unheard notes. Children, more sensitive to the unseen, began to avoid the water's edge. They would say nothing, only point to the current and tug at their mother's hands. A fisherman, old and nearly blind, whispered to the abbess that he'd seen figures dancing beneath the surface, women with streaming hair and eyes like polished stone. And still, the dancers came. Some were drawn to the bridges, twirling over them as if they were thresholds between worlds. Others danced along the riverbanks, feet slipping in mud, hands trailing through reeds. There were even those who stepped into the shallows, letting the cold water rise around their ankles as they moved to rhythms unheard. The river became a mirror to their trance. It reflected not just their bodies, but their mystery. Ripples spread like echoes of forgotten steps. Some said the water held memories, that it remembered all the grief, all the prayers, all the silence of the city, that it had borne witness to centuries of longing. And now, it responded in kind. Theologians argued whether water could be cursed, but the old remembered something else. Tales from before cathedrals, before cities. When rivers were sacred and feared, when spirits lived in currents, and dreams rose like mist from the reeds. At dusk, when the sky burned with golden ash, the river shimmered like a veil between worlds. The dancers, silhouetted against this fading light, seemed not quite earthly. Their shadows stretched across the water, doubling, shifting, elongating like ancient spirits returned from a forgotten age. And in the deep pools beneath the stone bridges, the water held those shadows, as if reluctant to let them go. Beyond the city walls of Strasbourg, where the dense canopy of the Vasius forests began to gather, there lived those who walked between worlds, keepers of ancient herbs, old prayers, and the wisdom of forgotten times. Among them was a woman known simply as Alza. She was neither young nor old, her face carved with lines, not of age, but of wind and woods. Her home lay nestled at the edge of the forest, near a spring where deer came to drink and moss grew thick upon the rocks. Some called her a healer, others a whisperer. Few dared say which, but all knew her name when illness came. The forest had taught her many things, that every plant held a song, that sickness often came not from the body, but from silence, that dreams, if ignored, could sour and rise into waking life like smoke in the lungs. When word of the dancing reached her, grove carried not by men, but by the flight of ravens and the strange stillness of the wind, she knew it was not illness in the ordinary sense. She felt it before she heard it. A vibration in the roots, a shiver in the birch leaves. One morning she gathered a satchel of herbs, valerian, mugwort, thyme, and descended toward the city. She entered Strasbourg quietly, her steps barely stirring dust. Few noticed her. Her presence, like the breeze before rain. But those who did see her stepped aside, sensing something both wild and sacred. Alzette went first to the square. The dancers were already there, dozens, perhaps more, moving as if tethered to the earth by invisible threads. Some wept. Others seemed peaceful, floating through their steps like fallen leaves in a current. None of them spoke. She did not interrupt. Her eyes moved not only over the dancers, but over the space between them. The silence, the rhythm, the way the air seemed thick with something ancient, unspoken. She pressed her palm against the stone and closed her eyes. The ground trembled, faintly, not with fear but with memory. Later she walked the perimeter of the square, sprinkling herbs in small spirals. Some laughed, some scoffed. A few cried and fell to their knees. But she said nothing. Alzette found Frau Traffia near the cathedral steps. The woman had danced so long her feet were wrapped in blood-stained cloth. Yet still, her body swayed, drawn by something no one else could see. Alzette knelt beside her and whispered something soft in a language that predated the church, a language of root and moon and bone. Frau Traffia paused. For a moment, the movement stilled. Her hands fell to her sides. Her breath deepened. Her eyes, once clouded, blinked once. In the days that followed, something began to shift within Strasbourg, not upon the surface, where cobblers still mended shoes and candles still flickered on altars, but in the very breath of the city, a low pulse, almost imperceptible, seemed to thrum beneath every stone. They called it the plague of dancing, yet no pestilence spread through air or blood. Instead, there was a presence, a pull, something that moved through dream and memory, waking what had long been buried. The dancers themselves spoke little, if at all. When they did speak, their words were hushed, fragmented, like voices rising through water. They did not explain why they danced. They only said that they had to, that to stop was agony, that something compelled them from within. But what compelled them? There was no flute, no fiddle, no choral procession leading them forward. And yet, some began to claim they heard something. Not loud, never clear, but present. A blacksmith swore he awoke in the night to the sound of a harp played far away. A young boy told his mother he heard footsteps echoing from the attic, though no one lived above. A widow near the river said that, on some evenings, the wind carried with it a lullaby she had not heard since her childhood, one her mother used to hum before the fever took her. It was not music of this world. It was older, raw, elemental. Some began to wonder if the earth itself was remembering something, and that the people, like reeds beside a river, were simply bending to its current. The cathedral bells tolled, but there sounded little to pierce the trance that had enveloped the dancers. Even the organ, when played during Sunday Mass, seemed muted in their presence, its tones dulled by an older harmony humming below the skin of the city. And still, more joined to dance. Young girls, who should have been weaving linen by the hearth. Old men, once stooped and weary, now twirling like children in a fevered dream. Even priests, in rare and hushed incidents, were seen to sway, just for a moment, before composing themselves, eyes wide with something close to. The Council of Strasbourg, desperate for order, hired musicians in an attempt to match and master this strange rhythm. Drummers, pipers, even choirs were summoned. In a city drawn into mystery, the physicians came in cloaks of crimson and ink, men of learning, bearers of scrolls, theories, and old Latin names. They arrived not with wonder, but with calculation, measuring pulses, inspecting tongues, asking questions that slipped off the dancers like rain from slate. They wrote diagnoses in hurried script: chorea, hysteria, overheating of the blood, unbalanced humors. Some traced the root to the heart, others to the spleen. A few, in quiet corners of libraries, admitted they had never seen anything like it. Still, they prescribed leeches to drain the fire from the veins, cold compresses of mint and chamomile, infusions of wormwood and sage. Some suggested bloodletting by the moon's phase. Others administered tinctures laced with opium, hoping sleep might still the fever of movement. But the dancers did not sleep, nor did they stop. The physicians could not explain why even those who had never spoken to each other, who lived in distant parts of the city, would suddenly begin to sway in rhythm, as though drawn into an invisible web. They could not account for why it spread through neighborhoods like a dream passing between walls. One elderly doctor, sent from Basel, stood in the cathedral square for 3 days, watching in silence. He did not open his satchel, he did not speak. Only on the 4th morning did he finally write, "This is not of the body, this is of the soul." His words were never published. As the days passed, the physicians began to fall silent. Their confidence gave way to hesitation. They no longer boasted in taverns or lectured in the marketplace. Some quietly left the city, returning to their universities in the hopes of forgetting what they had seen. A few stayed, but they no longer offered treatments. They stood by the edges of the dancing throngs, eyes hollow, lips drawn in silent contemplation. What could a surgeon's knife do against a rhythm that came from dreams? One of them, young, curious, and brave, ventured to speak to a dancer named Elsa, a woman of 30 who had not stopped moving for 5 days. He asked what she felt. Her answer was soft, her voice like leaves brushing marble. "I feel the sorrow of the ground," she said. Strasbourg had long been a city of bells. The great bell of the cathedral rang each day with solemn precision, its chime marking the passage of hours like a heartbeat made of bronze. Smaller bells echoed from chapels, convents, and city towers, each one with its own tone, its own sacred name. The city knew them well. Their voices were as familiar as the wind through the vineyards or the hush of the river at dusk. But as the dancing deepened, something strange occurred. The bells began to change. It was not their tone still tuned to perfection or their timing, still struck with exactness by trembling hands. It was something, a sense that when the bells rang, they no longer anchored time. Instead of calling the faithful to prayer or the workers to rest, they seemed to drift and moored from meaning, suspended in the same strange current that carried the dancers. People began to say the bells sounded hollow. One old woman, who lived near the cathedral all her life, swore she could no longer tell which bell was which. "They've forgotten themselves," she whispered. "They ring, but they do not know why." Others agreed. At Vespers, when the sun brushed the city in amber light, the bells no longer brought stillness. Instead, they joined the rhythm of the square echoes of bronze layered over the shuffle of feet, the whisper of cloth, the silent music only the dancers knew. And then came the day the bells rang on their own. It was the 21st morning since Frau Treffia's first steps. No hand had climbed the cathedral tower. No rope was pulled. But the great bell tolled once, then again, then a third time, low and solemn, as if mourning something lost long ago. The priests, startled, raced to the tower and found it empty. They searched for wind, for mischief, for some trick of weight or gravity, but none could explain it. The bell had simply rung and bitten, a monk later wrote in his private diary. The bell tolled for no one, and for everyone. From that day forward, the bells grew unpredictable. Sometimes they rang late, sometimes early, sometimes not at all, and when they did sound, their tones no longer felt anchored to the moment. It was as if they belonged to another time, echoes from a dream, distant and indistinct. Children began to cover their ears. Animals grew restless at the tolling. The dancers, however, seemed only to move more fluidly, as if the bells fed their rhythm, gave voice to the silence they followed. A theory arose among the elders. Perhaps the city had passed some long before the dancers filled the square, before Strasbourg streets echoed with the soundless rhythm, before the cathedral's bells began to chime to no one at all. There was a story, a saint, a boy, barely more than a child, who had defied an emperor and suffered for his faith. His name was Vitus. In the gilded manuscripts of monasteries and whispered tales passed from abbess to novice, his story lingered like incense long after the flame was gone. Born in Sicily, they said, to a pagan father, taught the Christian faith by his nursemaid and her husband, gifted with healing, hunted for his belief, cast into boiling oil and yet untouched by flame. He was a martyr, yes, but also something more. In the centuries after his death, strange things began to be attributed to his name. People in distant lands would fall into wild fits, shaking, twisting, dancing uncontrollably. Their bodies moved without command, eyes wide with ecstasy or terror. Physicians could not name it. Priests prayed over it. And so, it was given a name born of desperation and mystery. Chorea Sancti Viti, the dance of Saint Vitus. But few remembered the dream. It was said that before his martyrdom, the boy Vitus had a vision, not of angels or fire, but of people moving, flowing like water, a great multitude dancing, not in madness, but in unity, in harmony with the very breath of the world. In his dream, the heavens did not watch from above. They danced among men. He awoke trembling, unsure if the vision was prophecy or temptation. But the image never left him. Even in his final hours, it lingered bodies swaying beneath violet skies, feet striking earth in time with the stars. Centuries later in Strasbourg, no one spoke of that dream. They remembered the fits, the seizures, the frenzy. They called upon his name to drive out the dancers, not realizing that perhaps they were fulfilling something older than fear. Perhaps Vitus had seen something the world was not ready for. And now, in this city beneath the cathedral's spire, his vision stirred once more, not as madness, not as punishment, but as a memory returning to flesh. The priests invoked his name with solemnity. They placed his relics in the square, hoping to banish the sickness. They chanted litanies. They sprinkled holy water. And still, the dancers moved. Some, in the dim candlelight of study chambers and the quiet hours before dawn, quills scratched across parchment. The events in Strasbourg were unlike anything the city scribes, monks, or magistrates had ever recorded, and so they wrote furiously, faithfully, each line an attempt to hold still the swirling mystery before them. But not all writings were for the public scrolls. There were other letters, private, peasants almost whispered onto the page, letters that were never sent, folded carefully and hidden in drawers, or tucked between the pages of worn prayer books. Some were addressed to distant friends, others to lovers lost, to mothers passed on, or to saints whose silence was deafening. These letters were never meant for eyes. They were vessels for fear, for awe, for quiet longing. One such letter, penned by a novice monk named Elias, began. I do not understand what I see, but I feel it inside me, as if my own bones remember the steps. I watch them dance, and my hands tremble with the desire to join. Forgive me, Father, for I no longer fear the mystery, I crave it. He never posted it. Another, written by a midwife named Lena to her sister across the Rhine, read, They are not mad, their faces. Have you seen their faces? It is as if they walk through a dream, and though their bodies suffer, there is a kind of peace in their movement, a surrender. I tended them with oil and water, but I do not try to stop them anymore. I think they are closer to something we have all forgotten. Her letter remained folded beneath her floorboard, stained with lavender oil and ash. There were letters of fear, too. A magistrate wrote to an unnamed physician, I fear the order we have built is crumbling. The dancers obey no law, no church, no king. They move as if guided by a hand we cannot see. If this spreads, not just to bodies, but to thoughts, what then? What remains of the world we know? He burned the letter before it was sealed, and there were letters of longing quiet, aching confessions of those who stood at the edge of the square, day after day, heart beating in rhythm with the dancers, yet feet too afraid to move. A seamstress wrote, I dream now with my eyes open. When they spin, I feel the wind they stir. When they collapse, I feel the thud in my chest. I think I am dancing inside, but no one sees. What is this thing, this quiet music, that has made a temple of my silence? No courier ever came for it. These letters, scattered like leaves behind closed doors, became the secret scripture of Strasbourg's dance, a testament not of facts, but of feelings, not of answers, but of echoes. Centuries later, Strasbourg's market square had always been a place of clamor and life. Each morning, its stones came alive with the shuffle of feet and the rattle of wheels, the scent of fennel and ripe apples wafting from woven baskets. Voices called out in barter and greeting bakers selling warm loaves. Weavers unrolling cloth dyed in rose and ochre. Farmers proudly lifting jars of honey caught from the mouths of summer flowers. It was the pulse of the city, the heart that beat between cathedral and bridge. But on the 27th day since the dancing began, the market fell silent. It did not happen all at once. At dawn, the stalls were raised as usual. Vendors arrived and opened their crates. Carrots still shone with morning dew. Cheeses still sat firm and white on waxed cloth, but the air felt different, thick, slow, as though something unseen had drawn a veil across the city. The noise was hushed, the laughter. A woman dropped a basket of pears, and no one bent to help her gather them. Then came the dancers. A procession, as if from a forgotten dream, emerged through the narrow lanes leading into the square. They came not in chaos, but in strange grace. Dozens of them, some barefoot, some bloodied, their garments tattered by weeks of motion, their arms swept in slow arcs, fingers painting lines in the morning light. Their feet beat the rhythm into the stone beneath them. And the market stopped. Merchants fell silent, midst buyers froze with coins still in hand. One child clutched a jar of milk, staring as it tipped, unnoticed, onto the ground. No one dared move. The dancers reached the center of the square, and there they stayed. They did not speak, they did not cry. They danced, and as they did, the market, usually so alive with noise and color, became a cathedral of stillness. Even the animals felt it. The horses stood trembling. Birds which had nested in the eaves above did not sing that morning. One merchant later whispered that he saw time slow down, that the sun itself seemed to pause in the sky as if to watch. Another, an old woman who had sold herbs in the square since her youth, would later tell her granddaughter, I had always thought the market was the soul of the city, but that day I saw it was only the skin. The soul was dancing, and we had simply forgotten how to listen. No goods were sold that day. No trades were made. No arguments about weight or coin. The dancers remained in the square for hours. Some swayed gently as if in trance. Others spun with fierce grace. As the days wove themselves into weeks, the rhythm that haunted Strasbourg no longer belonged only to the waking. It crept into the soft folds of night, into bedrooms lit only by the moon, into cradles rocked gently by prayerful hands. The children began to dance in their sleep. At first it was brushed aside restless legs, the usual stirrings of dream, a child's twitch beneath woolen blankets. But soon, the signs grew stranger. Entire households were waking to the sound of footsteps on wooden floors, tiny feet, bare and soft, tapping out silent music long before dawn. Parents would rise and find their children standing upright, eyes closed, faces serene, their bodies swaying gently as if caught in the arms of a lullaby no one else could hear. They tried waking them. They tried shouting, clapping, even splashing water from the well. But the children danced on, undisturbed, as though the walls of the home no longer held them, as though they were elsewhere, far beyond. Some were found in gardens, standing under the moonlight, arms outstretched toward invisible stars. Others walked quietly down streets, their steps unerring, their faces turned toward some unseen beacon. One boy, no more than 6, was discovered by the cathedral steps, dancing in perfect circles before dawn. When his mother finally reached him weeping, he opened his eyes slowly and said, "I was following the lights." The lights, it became a whisper among parents. Some said that children spoke of flickering shapes that drifted through their bedrooms and night figures made not of flesh, but of shadow and shimmer, not threatening, not fearful. Present watch and beckoning. I heard the hum, one girl said. It told me to move. I saw the path in my dream, said another. And it led me to the square. Strasbourg's priests were summoned in urgency. Blessings were spoken over doorways, holy water sprinkled in bedrooms, psalms were sung as lullabies. Yet the children continued to move, and when they awoke, they remembered little, only the vague feeling that they had touched something vast and kind. Some of the older villagers remembered tales their own grandparents had whispered to them, stories of star spirits, of dream dancers. Strasbourg is a city made of stone, limestone, sandstone, river smooth granite, each block a memory carved by mason hands in time. The walls, the bridges, the cathedral itself. They stood not merely as shelter, but as witness. And in one corner of the cathedral square, there was a stone unlike the others. It lay flat, wide, nestled at the edge of the plaza where the dancers often passed. Though not carved with any name or date, it bore the wear of centuries. Rain had softened its edges, countless feet had passed over it, yet it remained still and strange. For those who stood upon it too long, an odd sensation arose of warmth, of pressure, or of something watching from beneath. Children avoided it, dogs circled it, even pigeons rarely landed there. One elderly stonemason who had helped repair the cathedral after a storm once knelt beside it and placed his ear to its surface. When he stood again, his face was pale. "It sings," he whispered, very low, like the voice of earth dreaming. Few believed him, but the dancers knew. Many of them paused upon that stone, not all, but enough to mark a pattern. Their steps would slow, their eyes close, their bodies sink into a deeper rhythm as if something beneath the stone matched their pulse. And then one night, it cracked. It was not a violent shattering, but a hair-thin fracture, running across its middle like a seam in the fabric of time. No one heard it break. No earthquake was recorded. But in the morning, a line of silver light shimmered within the crack, faint like moonlight trapped beneath glass. The priests ordered it covered. They feared relics of pagan days, feared that older spirits might be stirring. A heavy cloth was draped across it, but by evening, the cloth had been folded neatly to the side, untouched by any visible hand. The stone remained bare. Word of the crack spread, quietly, like perfume in a chapel. Some whispered it was the heart of the rhythm, that the movement had risen from beneath it, that what danced through the bodies of men and women had once been sealed below. But others, those who remembered the forest paths and the old songs, said the opposite. It was not a prison, they murmured. It was a drum of stone, buried long ago, waiting for the right season, the right sorrow, the right breath, to sound again. A traveler from the mountains, who spent one night in the city, claimed he dreamed of a great gathering around a fire, long before churches, long before words, and in the center of the circle there was a stone. As the rhythm deepened in Strasbourg, so too did the city's need to reclaim control. The council, pressed by fear and the quiet desperation of order slipping through its grasp, resolved to act once more. They decreed that the square, the very heart of the dancing, be cleansed by sacred fire. The order was issued with solemn words that the space where the dancers gathered should be purged of madness as spirits of dreams, that smoke might rise to the heavens and carry away whatever had taken root in the stones. So, at dusk, they built the fire. Great heaps of wood were dragged into the square oaken yew. Bundles of sage and thorn, barrels of resin were rolled to the center, their scent sharp and bitter in the warming air. Priests circled the pile in silence, murmuring prayers stitched from old tongues and new. The dancers had not arrived that evening. The square stood empty, the air taut with anticipation. Townsfolk gathered in doorways and windows, peering from the shadows, as if watching for the final breath of a ghost. The torch was lit. A young novice, hands trembling, stepped forward and touched the flame to the wood. Sparks leapt skyward like startled birds. Smoke coiled into the cathedral's arches, and for a moment there was silence, then nothing. The fire would not catch. Again and again, the torch was pressed to dry bark and twisted vine. Resin melted, but no flame took hold. The smoke curled and vanished. The wood remained cold, as though the very air had turned wet, heavy, thick with refusal. The priests tried again. A second torch, then a third. More prayers. Incense burned until the square was soaked in sweetness and ash. Still, the flame would not burn. The stone resisted. An elder priest, long quiet during the dancing, stepped forward at last. He walked slowly to the center of the unlit pyre and placed his hand upon the wood. He closed his eyes, and in a voice soft as dusk, he spoke. "Fire does not cleanse what is not unclean," and walked away. That night, the council said nothing. The wood remained in the square, untouched, a monument to their powerlessness. But when the stars rose and the moon silvered the rooftops, the dancers returned. They stepped into the square, into the circle of unburned firewood, and began to move. And this night, their rhythm was different. It was not frantic, not wild. It was slow, reverent, like a ritual remembered from lifetimes before. In the quiet alleys just beyond the cathedral square, past a worn archway where ivy crept like old handwriting across the stone, lived the weavers of Strasbourg. They were women mostly, though not all. Elders with fingers gnarled like roots, young girls with nimble hands and faraway eyes. They spun threads in pale dawn light, dyed wool in steaming vats, and wove patterns older than parchment into tapestries and cloaks. They had always worked in silence, but in the days of the dancing, something changed in their threads. It began subtly. One weaver, Annalise, found her shuttle moving in strange rhythm. The warp and weft twisted not into her usual patterns of vine and blossom, but into loops and spirals, curving like wind across water. At first, she tried to undo it. The loom resisted, so she followed. Others noticed the same. Hands that had woven stars and saints now traced shapes they did not recognize, shapes that echoed the movements of the dancers, swords, arcs, open circles that never closed. The wool shimmered in new ways, catching the morning light like river mist. A girl named Marette, barely 14, wove a piece so hypnotic in its geometry that her mother wept upon seeing it. "It feels like a song," she said, "but not one I've ever heard." The weavers gathered in the twilight hours, comparing their work, unrolling bolt after bolt of fabric until the stone floor was hidden beneath a sea of strange forms. And in every one of them, the rhythm pulsed silent, patient, alive. One elder traced a spiral on the cloth with her finger and said quietly, "These are not new patterns. They are old. We just forgot how to see them." No one argued. They began working not from charts or tradition, but from instinct. They wove at dawn, at dusk, by candlelight and starlight. Their hands moved with a kind of trance, each thread laid down as if summoned from some ancient memory. Soon, the garments of the dancers changed. Some came to the weavers seeking cloth not for beauty, but for belonging. The fabric seemed to calm them, soften the urgency in their steps. One woman, wrapped in a cloak of indigo and copper spirals, danced with tears running silently down her cheeks. She said she felt held not by cloth, by something deeper. And then, the children, they came unbidden, quiet as snowfall, standing in the doorway of the weaving rooms with wide eyes. There comes a moment, subtle and unannounced, when the thread of time begins to loosen. It does not snap, nor tangle. It drifts, like a ribbon caught in the wind, drifting just beyond the hand's grasp. And in Strasbourg that drifting began, softly. At first it was the clocks, the great timepiece in the cathedral, that magnificent marvel of gears and gilded hands, began to chime oddly, hours early. It no longer ruled the day, but wandered through it. The monks, keepers of the sacred hours, corrected it at first winding, watching its hands like watchmen over a sleeping king. But the timepiece would not obey. Some mornings it stood still, its hands locked in contemplation. Other nights it whirled forward, ticking as if chasing a dream. Eventually they left it alone. The rhythm it followed was no longer theirs. Then, the merchants' market days lost their certainty. No one remembered if it was Tuesday or Thursday. The days no longer arrived with names. They came like tides, warm and slow, bearing dancers and stillness in equal measure. Letters were left undated, records unfinished. The city's scribes found themselves staring into inkwells, uncertain what to write. "Is it the 23rd?" one asked. "Or the 40th? No," said another. "It is the day of the riverside." So they began to name time differently. The day the fire wouldn't burn, the evening the bells faded, the night the children sang, and among them, whispered only in the quietest of breaths, the day the moon danced in the river. They were not counting forward, nor backward. They were measuring time by feeling, by echoes, by rhythm. A baker rose before dawn and no longer cared how many days the dancing had lasted. He only watched the sky for when the light turned the rooftops to rose, and the flowers seemed to shimmer with something more than dust. A teacher stopped marking her lessons in sequence. She taught not letters, but silence, not numbers, but breath. The children learned quickly. The council attempted to maintain the calendar, but their scrolls lay forgotten, their meetings unattended, their ink dried in wells left uncapped, even the seasons blurred. Was it late summer, early autumn? The air cooled, but the leaves clung to their branches. The sun set earlier, yet lingered in the city's corners, casting long golden shadows that moved without haste. And through it all, the dancers remained. They did not age, or rather they began to arrive just as the leaves took on the faintest hint of amber, drifting into Strasbourg not in groups or caravans, but alone in twos. In silence, no trumpets, no declarations, no footsteps hurried by purpose. They came as if drawn from villages tucked into the folds of hills, from cities beyond the distant forests, from abbeys wrapped in fog. They appeared, travelers cloaked not in wealth or rank, but in the hush of knowing. They were the pilgrims without questions. No one summoned them. No messengers rode ahead to announce their arrival, and yet they came. Men and women of all ages, some carrying nothing, others bearing satchels filled with stones or branches, or pages scrawled with unreadable glyphs. They did not ask what had happened. They did not seek the cause of the dance. They did not offer explanations, nor press for truths. They came to witness, and in their witnessing, they too began to listen. Many did not enter the city immediately. Some lingered at the gates. Others sat in fields outside the walls, watching the wind move through tall grass. Waiting for what? None could say. When they did step into the city, they walked slowly, reverently, as if each cobblestone held a name too holy to speak. They passed the shops, the market, the river, but it was the square they sought, the place where the rhythm had first found voice. They did not interrupt the dancers. They sat, they stood. Some placed their palms upon the stones. Others closed their eyes and breathed, as if trying to match the city's new heartbeat. One man, old as bark, knelt for a full day beside the stone that had cracked, head bowed, lips unmoving. When he rose, he left behind a bundle of dried sage wrapped in river. A woman arrived carrying an obsidian bowl. She filled it with water from the ill, set it in the cathedral's shadow, and walked away. A child from across the mountains brought with him a simple flute, carved by his grandfather. He played only once 3 notes and then broke it gently in his hands, laying the pieces at the feet of a dancer who wept but never stopped moving. The people of Strasbourg, once wary of outsiders, did not object. They had grown used to the rhythm. They understood now that the mystery was not theirs alone, that whatever had descended or awakened had no borders, no language, no name. The pilgrims continued to arrive. Some stayed for days, others for only a breath. Some danced. It was neither marked on any calendar nor foretold by priest or skyite, or would come to remember it. The night no one spoke. It began with dusk arriving earlier than expected, soft and slow, like silk slipping down stone. The sky held no stars at first, only a pale wash of lavender and ash. The bells, now unruly in their timing, did not ring. The cathedral stood quiet, its great spire casting a long, delicate shadow across the square. The dancers were already there. They had arrived before the light dimmed, as if summoned by some inner tide. No rush, no flurry. They simply appeared, emerging from alleyways and archways, from behind cloaks of ivy, from the thresholds of houses now accustomed to the rhythm. Their feet struck the stone in perfect silence, and for the first time, no one spoke. The vendors did not call out. The children did not laugh. Even the birds, restless companions of twilight, did not stir in their roosts. The city had fallen into a stillness deeper than sleep, and in that stillness, the dancers moved. Their steps were slower that night, deliberate, careful, like rituals remembered in the body rather than the mind. Hands curved into gestures that echoed the spiral patterns woven by the weavers. Feet traced the outlines of glyphs no scholar had yet named. Those who watched did not whisper. They did not murmur theories or prayers. They simply listened. It was said that even the river paused its murmuring, that the wind passed above the rooftops without touching a single eave, that the very air grew still. And then a sound, but not of voice, not of instrument, not of bell. It was a hum, low and resonant, like the memory of thunder heard through stone. It did not come from any one place. It came from everywhere, from beneath, from above, from within. The dancers heard it. Their movements shifted, became one. For the first time since the strange rhythm had gripped Strasbourg, they danced as a single body, breaths aligned, limbs like branches swaying in one ancient wind. There was no struggle, no collapse, no tremor of exhaustion. Only grace, only rhythm, only silence woven with sound. And still, no one spoke. Sleep in its true form had been absent from Strasbourg for weeks. The dancers had moved beyond the boundaries of waking and rest, dwelling in a space that defied cycles, where the body's yearning to surrender was held at bay by a rhythm stronger than fatigue. They collapsed, yes, but not into sleep, only into stillness, pauses in the song. And yet, one morning, long after the night of silence, something shifted. The first arrest was a young woman who had danced since the earliest days. Her Nina, forgotten by most, had once been Clara. She moved like mist over water, never frantic, always with a kind of sacred sorrow. That morning, beneath the soft blue wash of dawn, her steps slowed, not from weakness, but from completion. She turned in a final arc, her fingers tracing something invisible in the air, and then gently lowered herself to the stone. She closed her eyes and slept, not in collapse, not in unconscious surrender, but in peace. She curled as one might beneath a tree, her breath deep and slow, her lips parting slightly as if whispering the last line of a forgotten lullaby. Others followed. One by one, the dancers came to stillness. Some leaned against walls warmed by the rising sun. Some lay side by side in the cathedral square. Others found beds offered by the townspeople, beds left empty for days in anticipation of this moment. And for the first time in many weeks, the rhythm receded. Not vanished, not silenced, but softened, like music still playing beyond the edge of hearing, like a memory that no longer burns. The city did not cheer. It did not weep. It watched, reverently, as those who had carried the rhythm for so long were finally allowed rest. The weavers hung new tapestries across their doorways. The pilgrims lit quiet candles at corners of the square, their flames flickering not in mourning, but in gratitude. The priests sang not hymns of triumph, but soft antiphons of farewell, tones that rose and fell like the final sigh before sleep. And the river, ever silent, long after the square had emptied, after the last dancer had rested their limbs and breathed in stillness, after the council's scrolls had gathered dust, and the cathedral bells returned to their sacred rhythm, not in structure nor in law, but in soul. The rhythm, the mystery that once turned footsteps into prayers and silence into song, had not vanished. It had softened, folded itself gently into the folds of daily life. You could feel it in the pause before a baker sliced his morning loaf, in the gentle sway of laundry on a line in late autumn, in the way a grandmother's fingers tapped at the table's edge without thought. It echoed in the lull of conversation between merchants, in the hush of twilight beneath the arches of the bridge, in the breaths of newborns who, without knowing, moved to their limbs in sleep to a cadence older than their names. The rhythm became part of the city's memory, not a wound nor a lesson, but a presence, like a soft hand on the shoulder, a quiet hum beneath the skin, the stone in the square, the one that cracked and glowed once in the starlit silence, still lay bare, unmoved, unclaimed. Pilgrims continued to leave small offerings beside it. Feathers, sprigs of rosemary, poems inked on scraps of cloth. Children played there now. Sometimes, without music, they would spin in slow circles, laughing quietly, their feet brushing ancient rhythm into dust. And the weavers, though returning to patterns of vine and leaf, always left a spiral near the edge, a silent homage. The priests spoke less often of Saint Vitus, but when they did, it was not as a cure, but as a dreamer. A few who had danced went on to become teachers. Their students often noted something strange in them, a way of listening between words, of pausing before answering, as though they lived half in this world and half in another, one stitched together not by events, but by feeling. And though most never danced, and so, dear dreamer, we have drifted through the soft shadows of Strasbourg, walked its misted alleys, and felt the ancient rhythm that once stirred a city into motion without music. Not a tale of fear, but of mystery, of surrender, of a silence that dances, and a dance that prays. What began with one woman's quiet steps in the heat of summer became a ripple across time, not to be solved, but to be remembered, not through reason, but through rhythm, through breath, through stillness. And now, as your own breath slows and your body softens into rest, know this: the rhythm has not vanished. It hums beneath your heartbeat. It sways in the hush between thoughts. It waits in the folds of your dreams. Perhaps tonight, as sleep gathers you gently into its arms, you'll feel it, that soft echo of footsteps far away, that whisper of movement beyond the veil. Let it carry you, not toward understanding, but toward wonder. Let it guide you, not through answers, but through reverence. And as the stars turn slowly overhead, and the night leans in to listen, feel the presence of all those across time who have danced not for joy, not for sorrow, but for remembrance. Before we part, fellow traveler of the twilight, if this journey stirred something quiet within you, leave behind a gentle like, not for me, but for the echoes. Join our circle of wandering souls by subscribing, not to content, but to communion. And tell us from which corner of the world you join tonight's contemplation. Let our circle stretch across oceans and clocks, a web of dreamers bound not by time, but by mystery. Sleep now, softly. The rhythm is beneath you. Always. Good night.